Hello, good morning, and welcome everyone in the practical session of the salivary glands histology. As we have said, the salivary glands are arranged in a compound, complex branching of tubulo-acinar morphology. We have the acinus, which is the end secretory factory for the saliva, and the duct system from smallest to the largest excretory duct. It may be of mucus type, serous type, or a mixed type. The major salivary glands that we talked about are the parotid, the sublingual, and the submandibular. This is a histological section of the parotid gland. The acini are of one type, serous type, which have a clear pink cytoplasm. Dividing the lobules are the connective tissue septa, which contain usually the collecting ducts, nerves, and blood vessels. You see the lumen of these acini are very low and can be hardly seen. Again, this is a magnified view of the serous acini. We see here small striated ducts and separated with connective tissue septa, encapsulated by the parotid gland capsule. Magnified view of showing the serous acini with the striated ducts penetrating and the collecting ducts in the connective tissue septa. Near the capsule, the connective tissue capsule and the fat cells are seen. Here we can see the small intercalated ducts, larger striated ducts, and the connective tissue septum. The view of the serous cells is granulous. You can see the violet granules. The striated ducts have a columnar epithelium. We can also see the small intercalated ducts in between the acini. A more magnified view showing the granulous appearance of the serous cells, the very small lumen, and appears around the acini in the corner the myoepithelial cells with its high dendrites and processes. The serous acini are with the intercalated ducts compressed in between, and the striated duct, bigger ducts, the collecting ducts. One small intercalated ducts, and the striated ducts appear more columnar in shape around nucleus with scanty cytoplasm. Very obvious intercalated ducts in between, compressed in between the acini. Also a magnified view of the intercalated duct. We can see obvious in this magnification the myoepithelial cells around the acini and around the intercalated ducts. These cells have the function, contractile function, to push out the mucus, increase the pressure, and increase the outflow of the serous secretions. Also, we see the mucus acini, the intercalated ducts in between, and the other look of striated ducts, which have a wider lumen. Obvious, the striated ducts, which are long and branching in the parotid gland. A magnified view of the intercalated duct. Here also showing the intercalated duct compressed between the serous acini and the parotid gland. The white spaces are the fat cells. A view showing the small intercalated ducts, the wider striated ducts. This is a striated duct. Again, two obvious striated ducts. A magnified view of the striated duct, where we can see the brushed border on the luminal surface. The collecting duct of the parotid gland has a mucosa and a connective tissue adventitia around. Smaller ducts that are found are the striated ducts. A magnified look of the collecting duct. The collecting duct may have two layers of cells, with basal cell layer that may be present. Moving to the submandibular gland, we see a mixed type of secretory cells. In the center are the mucus cells, which appear paler under the microscope, surrounded by more darker serous acini cells. We see a predominance of the serous, dark serous type. In between these acini, we see varying diameters of very small intercalated ducts, wider striated ducts, and we don't see any collecting ducts. Or we actually have collecting ducts. Again, we see a mixture of mixed secretory cells. The serous demilunes are sometimes obvious around the central mucus cells. Striated ducts are also obvious. We can hardly locate intercalated ducts. A more magnified view. Mucus cells have more located, basally located nuclei. We see striated ducts that have columnar epithelium. More obvious are the striated ducts in between the serous acini and the mucus pale acini. The mucus cells, they look very clear under the microscope. A next zoom. The acini with the striated ducts in between, the connective tissue septa with the big collecting ducts. See the collecting ducts, they appear clear. Remember that the intercalated system is more developed in the parotid gland. Again, obvious the pale mucus acini with the serous surrounding and serous cells surrounding the striated ducts. The cells in between the striated ducts are plasma cells. Separating the lobules are connective tissue septa. A more magnified look of the striated duct. Similarly, we see clusters of secretory cells with striated ducts. In a magnified look, we see small intercalated ducts with prominent nuclei and larger striated ducts around the secretory acini. Again, striated ducts are obvious, and we can see larger collecting ducts. Similarly, a couple of striated ducts. Very obvious of the larger collecting ducts where we may have a pseudostratified appearance and connective tissue around. You can see the smaller striated ducts also. Magnified look of the collecting ducts of the submandibular gland. A mixed glandular parenchyma, showing here more predominance of the mucus glands, which are mucus cells, which are paler, and less of the more reddish, here darker, serous demilunes. This is a section of the sublingual major gland, penetrating our striated ducts and the bigger collecting ducts. Remember that the intercalated system is very poorly developed in this predominantly mucus secretion. We see the mixture clusters of serous, of mucus secretory units. We can note the wider lumen in compared to the only serous parotid gland, for example. It is obvious the serous demilunes around the mucus cells. Also, we can see the corners of the image, the striated ducts, and in the center. Again, the clusters of mucus cells, serous demilunes, and the striated duct system. Here's a magnified view on one intercalated duct. Again, we see multiple striated ducts in between the cells, secretory acini, with a very unusual appearance of intercalated duct. A magnified view of the intercalated duct and multiple striated ducts. Striated duct. Here we see the collecting duct of the sublingual gland, larger in diameter with a connective tissue adventitia. Finally, this is an electron micrograph of the myoepithelial cell with its dendritic processes. The nucleus appears flat. In the dendritic processes, we may have actin filaments and cytokeratins also originating from the epithelial cell. These cells are surrounding secretory acini. Thank you for your attention.